Okay guys, so today I wanted to do a video about, so when I started out doing programming in college and things like that, I didn't really have an idea of what I needed to learn as a whole. And I didn't really know, how much I was going to need to learn. And I just, in a sense, you're zoomed in and you start learning a programming language, but it's really nice to have a map of what you need to learn. That way you can build a time frame, you can study on the side, and you can also find out what area of software development you want to get into. So I kind of made a map here, and it's kind of geared toward a software developer who is kind of centered around Java, um, and maybe this would be kind of a full stack Java developer, and this is kind of where this map is gearing towards. So basically what I'm going to go over is kind of the things that you're going to learn throughout your, let's say if you're doing college boot camp, or your software development career. So I thought this would be a cool video to make. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in of all the different areas and stuff you can learn, technologies. And I mean, this is, again, high level. We could go into detail about every category here or every branch, but let's just dive in. So when you first start out programming, you're going to learn your core and your fundamentals. So let's just say, yeah, for this instance, we're doing like a Java. Your core object-oriented programming language is going to be Java. So I got the branch here. So just your basics. When you go through your introductory programming course, you're going to learn, obviously how the compiler works, the JVM, things like that, the editors and the development kit that you're going to use. You're going to go over that stuff. You want to know that. Simple stuff, variable data types, int, string, the differences between them, when you would use them. So like int, double, float, short, long, things like that. Go over that stuff. Statements, if else statements. Obviously methods, you're going to learn how methods and classes work in object-oriented programming. Your simple input output into files onto the console, things like that. You might mess around with some GUIs on your editor. And I just put OOP, like concepts. So your inheritance, composition, polymorphism, all that good stuff, all those concepts in here. So that's your core that you're going to learn. You're usually going to cover all that in your intro to programming class. Now, if you're going to self-teach, you can find all this stuff online. I do a bunch of Udemy courses on the side that are really well. So I would check out Udemy, cheap courses that are good that will go over all that stuff for you. Okay, and then, so that's kind of that branch. You got to have that down. You're going to spend maybe 6 months to a year, depending on your time frame, just getting that stuff down. And then you're going to kind of dip off into this branch here, which is going to be like your core programming. So it doesn't really matter what language you've used. At my university, they switched over and made us use C++. C++ gets you more into the memory allocation and pointers and things like that. So core programming. So you want to know your data structures and algorithms. When you finish your degree or your boot camp or you're self-taught, this is where the interviewing is going to hit heavy. It's going to be data structures and algorithms. So data structures, array lists, regular arrays, linked list, trees, stacks, queues, all that good stuff, and then your algorithms. It just takes practice, but you gotta practice to learn how to problem solve and think like a developer. Also, this you're gonna want to practice throughout your learning is clean code. So you're gonna, especially with object-oriented programming, you definitely want to practice the composition, encapsulation, things like that, clean code. You want to keep it simple, unnecessary. You want to be able to reuse the code, so you don't want it really dependent on each other. So you'll practice all those concepts And then I also threw Agile in here. So I should have just put SDLC, your software development lifecycle. So when you get into the career, you're not just going to be coding. It's a life cycle with planning, meeting with your clients, testing, things like that. So Agile, now development teams and corporations, they don't want to do the waterfall method where you just go in order, but you want to be flexible. If you have a new feature or a change from the client, you want to be agile. You want to be able to work with your team and bounce back quick and add that new feature in. So you'll go over that. You definitely want to get that stuff down. And then eventually you're going to start, working in backend stuff. So you'll dip into database, MySQL. I don't really have that on here. I guess you can kind of throw that in DevOps because you'll be getting into servers like Apache and Tomcat, things like that, server software. That way you can, eventually deploy kind of an application or a website and, have requests come into servers to use your application. So you're going to use, like I said, Tomcat, Apache, stuff like that. And for the database, you're definitely going to want to learn, MySQL or some kind of database query language. So that would be kind of an overview of the back end. You'll get into tools that'll help you easier work with your full stack or your full web application when you start getting into that stuff like Maven. Maven is a nice software that basically keeps track and helps you download files and things that you will need. It makes it a lot easier. So I'm not going to dive deep into that. Source control, GitHub, you'll definitely need to dip into that right away. That allows you to basically push your code into remote repositories. Put simply, if you're working on a project together, you're not getting out the flash drive or, copying files and things like that. You're pushing your code remotely to, a cloud or a repository. That way, other developers can pull it down, and it helps keep track of your code and helps you work with others remotely. So source control, GitHub, that'll be huge. Your GitHub, you should start building that profile and that code. That way interviewers and employers can see your projects. So GitHub is a huge one. That's where source control is. I put OS on here. You should know operating system, kind of basics. You should dive into Linux a little bit and the terminal, things like that. So I think that's a good high-level brush. You'll have your frameworks for Java. So Spring is a good framework to basically separate your business logic from the front end. So when you're developing, when you get into web development with Java, your Spring's a very popular one. That's a framework to have clean and separate your code so that a guy can work on the front end and you can work on the Java logic and processing, and it's just a clean separation. So Spring, usually Spring MVC, the model view controller architecture is good. Java EE, the Enterprise Edition, that is going to basically when they first started before Spring, they started out when you're making web applications, you're going to use Java server faces or pages, JSPs, JSFs, and you're going to use what's called beans. And when it first started out, you'll want to understand, because Spring makes life easier, but you do want to understand how it all works. So that's when you're going to dip into like beans and things like that. Hibernate, that is a framework to help you connect your Java with the backend. So your backend is going to be like, let's say MySQL. Instead of using JDBC directly, JDBC is just the database connection library that helps you connect your Java logic and processing to your database and help you write queries and extract and manipulate data. So that can be a lot of code. So Hibernate came in where it's a framework for really, it's an ORM framework, um, object relational mapping framework, where it makes life really easy. You don't have to write any query code. You just tell it, hey, I want to map these classes into my database, and life is so much easier. So ORM frameworks or Hibernate is really good. So you'll want to learn that. And then obviously testing. Testing is a big thing that people kind of look over, but you want to get into testing. JUnit's the one you'll probably be familiar with and start out with. You definitely want to test your code, and you want to test it constantly. You write a little bit of code, test it, write a little bit of code, test it. Get into that habit. And we'll talk about web. I believe no matter what kind of developer you are, whether you're not front end or anything, you should definitely dive into networking, HTTP, secure, just learn how the basics of networking, routers, switches, packets, all that stuff, and just learn how it works. Just the fundamentals, get post requests. You'll want to definitely learn about some JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. So that's how you can use JavaScript to create objects and pass data through servers. So Ajax, that's asynchronous Java, and XML. You'll want to kind of brush over that, just know how that kind of stuff works. But yeah, web I think is very important, whether you're going to be a web developer or not. You want to know the basics, HTML, just how to structure your web page. CSS is going to be the cascading style sheets, so that's just styling your web page. So you want to dip into that. Now CSS is, there's so much to learn on that, but just dive into it a little bit, learn the basics. JavaScript, that is going to be the language that allows you to have the functionality on your website. So you're not really going to have functions on your website. That's just styling and structuring your page. That's when JavaScript comes in handy, and you want to do some function on the client side. But JavaScript is just a whole different beast. You can branch off and there's lots of frameworks for JavaScript, and it's very powerful and can be used anywhere. But just definitely dip into those three. Those are the three main guys you want to learn for web development. Bootstrap is a framework for CSS. Bootstrap just makes life easy. Instead of, it's basically pre-built code that you can kind of plug into your program. So Bootstrap is really nice. It has templates and stuff. That way you don't have to write CSS from scratch. And that is really nice. There's you'll learn about Flexbox and Grid and things like that with CSS. Just dive into the basics. I wouldn't get too sucked into this. The JavaScript right now, React and Angular are the popular frameworks. But I would really just learn plain old vanilla JavaScript and get that down first. I think that's a good high-level overview just to give you an idea. I kind of wish I had this when I started programming, just to kind of wrap my head around things. And like I said, this is like a senior full-stack developer who would, know all the ins and outs of this. But I think you should definitely brush into all of these. Definitely get your core Java down for sure. And your data structures and algorithms, and practice on clean code. And then kind of start brushing on all these, and you'll be on your way to a good developer. Okay, guys, so I think that's it. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Let me know if you guys have any questions.